Is it a big deal that Andrew Berry could be supporting Deshaun Watson versus maybe not supporting Deshaun Watson versus maybe he's coming back versus maybe he's not coming back, maybe something else? What does Andrew Berry really mean?
Well, I mean, listen, it's gone so smoothly with Deshaun Watson.
I mean, it's been the best case scenario play out since they've gotten a hold of him.
I agree. Like, you talk about bang for your buck.
I mean, ROI.
No pun intended.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. But nonetheless, Andrew Berry, the GM of the Cleveland Browns, did talk about the Deshaun Watson situation yesterday. Obviously, he is on the mend, out for the year with the Achilles. Let's take a listen to the Cleveland GM.
I'm really not in reflection mode. I think that's probably – I remember I got asked this about Dobbs last year. It's really not really my focus at this point in the year. Our focus is really on – finishing out the 2024 season, having the team play at a higher level, and then kind of we'll get to like those maybe longer term or big picture reflections at a later point in time. Really, our focus with Deshaun, I would say for any player with a season-ending injury and a major injury, is first and foremost with the recovery and to make sure that he gets healthy from the Achilles injury. Everything else we'll deal with at a later moment.
Is there a world in which Deshaun Watson can come back here and play more football for you guys again?
Yeah, I think that's always possible.
I mean, listen.
I mean, those are all expected responses, if you ask me. Very, very minimum, very, non-committal, but very standard. That's a standard response.
Right. Well, what we didn't have is sound on a few different ways in which, he answered things. So, for example, he talked about, obviously this being less than ideal, in particular to evaluating, these long absences. But he did mention that, hey, all of us were on board when we made the decision, and everyone was on board. Almost like kind of saying, yeah, this looks like it's going to be on my lap at some point because of the contract, because of how we've built this roster. But everyone was on board with that decision. And I think you make a comment like that because if you're looking around the room, Jimmy Haslam ain't going anywhere. Kevin Stefanski just won Coach of the Year. So I think people are giving him the benefit of the doubt, given he's won it twice. So he's got the reputation for being this coach. And I'm sure there's been times when you hear him talk and it feels like he doesn't want to have to deal with this. I mean, we talked about that earlier, LaVar, this season. And so if you're looking at the direction of where the season's going, and if we get to the end of the year and fans are like, well, doesn't someone have to take the fall for this? Like, doesn't someone have to take the blame for how we get here? It might be pointing squarely at Andrew Berry. And if that's the case, there's probably a thought of like, he better start laying the groundwork to protect himself or insulate himself from being the guy that like ultimately made this decision. That's what I think this is about. That's what I think where this might be heading.
I would say it's interesting that perspective because I totally agree. In sports, there always has to be a fall guy. You just ask Chris Carter. You got to make sure you have that fall guy in place.
Y'all got a crew.
You got a crew. You got to have a fall guy. And that's how this thing all works. Something goes wrong. It doesn't need to go wrong for you. It needs to go wrong for that designated fall guy.
Imagine saying that with a straight face to rookies.
I just think that where Cleveland is right now, someone has to take the blame for this decision that took place with Deshaun Watson. And I think at this point, it's clear you can define the Deshaun Watson situation as a debacle. So it's the Deshaun Watson debacle. Now it becomes the Deshaun Watson controversy because the controversy exists in who made the decision. I made the point not too long ago where I felt like Stefanski was falling on the sword for whoever made this decision by the things that he said as it applied to what they were doing and how they were handling things with Watson. Now Watson gets injured. It's out of Stefanski's hands because fate handled the situation for Kevin Stefanski. Now it falls in the hands of probably most likely the people who made the decision to bring him there. And you're never going to sit there and say that it's purely Andrew Berry that's to blame for it in the public because you can't bring in a guy at that amount of money without the ownership being in total lockstep with doing that because it's too much money. But since you're not going to make a move on ownership is never going to be incorrect in these scenarios. The designated fall guy in this situation has to be the GM.
I have a two-part question for you guys. All right, first part is, do the Cleveland Browns have a good roster?
Yes.
Okay. So
it's a good solid roster.
Andrew Berry's the GM there. He would probably be one of the reasons why they've built up a decent roster. Here's the second question. Who do you believe ultimately made the decision to bring in Deshaun Watson?
Ownership.
Yeah. So how the hell could Andrew Berry be held responsible for something ownership did when he's built a good roster?
Because somebody has to be the sacrificial lamb to maintaining hope for your fan base.
Jimmy Haslam can't come out and be like, "Hey, that's on me." Like, sorry. He
could.
He's lost credibility.
He could.
Obviously, I'm a little closer to the Cleveland situation than most, because when you watch how he took over as an owner, and there's been turnover after turnover after turnover, at some point, and he kept talking about wanting to fix it, wanting to get it right, it's hard to build up any confidence with anyone within that organization with him and their decision making. So because of that, I think that's the hard part. Is I don't know that he wants to admit that he was wrong. I mean, it's pretty blatant too. I think when you look at it, we all realize, like, well, if anyone was to blame, it's probably him for ultimately agreeing to it. But again, maybe it should have been Andrew Berry who said, "Hey, Jimmy, don't do this. Like, you don't need to give him this contract," because ultimately he had to sign off on that. So, and by the way, the roster building, an owner can sit there and say, "Well, I was able to pay a bunch of cash too to help make that roster possible." There's the drafting of it as well. I mean, it's more of a cohesive group. So, if you're looking at this, like, who else was going to take the blame if it's not Andrew Berry?
I think Kevin Stefanski could have been the fall guy just based off of the performance of the team. And with Deshaun Watson in there, if they're not performing at a high level, there's the possibility that you could say, all right, like, this falls to an easy low-hanging fruit to the
which I also wonder if he'd be okay with that, because he's like, I don't want to be in this situation anymore either.
Hey, Q, that's why I said before, I feel like he's like, hey, I'll take the blame, because in the end, think about it, right? Think about everything we're saying right now. If you think back to Stefanski saying, I'm making the final decision here, it's my decision to make, he's basically saying, do not look at anyone else as being culpable for what's taking place with Deshaun Watson. I got it. So if it does indeed fall on his feet that he's got it, Andrew Berry has an easy out, and so does ownership. But with that being said, nobody's going to look at Kevin Stefanski if he gets fired and say, Kevin Stefanski did a horrible job as a coach for the Cleveland Browns. You're looking at it like he got screwed. Yeah. He took one for the team. So it actually was a strategically sound decision, and especially if it's based off of your reasoning of what you're saying right now. It's like, hey, maybe I want to get out of this situation. Maybe I don't want to work in this dysfunction, and now I'm able to get out of it, keep my reputation intact. I took one for the team. It's clear that I took this bullet for the team, and now that gives me an opportunity to start anew and maybe clean the slate and go somewhere where it's actually a better situation.
And proven that he can do it with other quarterbacks not named Deshaun Watson. Like, he did it with Flacco, he did it with Baker Mayfield. He took the team to the playoffs twice with two different quarterbacks. That
contract says you were clearly there's. I would not be able to name very many, if any at all, head coaches that would have the pimp hand. Excuse me, not pimp hand, but the strong hand. It's not appropriate anymore.
Damn.
The strong hand to be able to wield a offer such as the one that Deshaun Watson got. That's out of his pay grade, because it's so far out of the parameters of what a budget would be within the confines of this cap. You're not going, as a head coach, you're not going to be able to clear and give a contract like that out to any player. You're not. So I think Stefanski's playing it the right way. Don't say not one word bad about anybody in this organization. Just keep coaching the best that you can. knowing that everybody's looking at it and talking about what the dysfunction has looked like, or the disconnect and the lack of success from Deshaun Watson and all of the things that have gone along with Deshaun Watson. It's an easy out. So it's kind of like a tug of war at this point. Barry has to present himself in a way where he stays surface level, which that's what he did. Stefanski has to be the coach and try to maintain his respect with his players and maintain, what it is that he does, the integrity of his job. And that's what he did. The only person you ain't heard from in all of this is the ownership, which in reality, that's probably the proper way for them to handle it as well. So to me, you got three entities that are handling the situation in what is perceivably self-preservation mode for all parties involved.
Yeah.
Three-way game of chess going on, which I've never seen that before, but I think that would be pretty cool to watch that take place on a board, actually.
That would be sweet.
Yeah.
Lee's seen that in an adult film before.
Oh.
Yeah. Where'd the rook go?
Called the torpedo at 3 a.m.
Trying to steal my bishop.
That's what the name of this show is called today. 3 a.m. with my torpedo in my mouth.
little game of hide the rook.
He can't talk right now because his mouth is full.
Wait, are you really eating right now?
Him in there eating.
You're piping that sandwich down already?
Him he's scarfing it.
You can eat things.
Got about a third
Good.
down.
It's good.
Dear God, it's good.
Thank you.
Can we verify whether or not you're eating this right now because you need to cushion whatever you consumed yesterday as far as adult beverages?
Ooh.
I had a couple margaritas yesterday,
Ooh.
but that was really early in the day, so I'm doing good.